We now move to the motion on Charter for Budget Responsibility. Minister to move. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that the motion in the name of my right honourable friend, the Chancellor. That motion relates to the UK's fiscal framework. It is a framework that matters, it guides fiscal policy and it provides both transparency and accountability. Since coming to office, this government has reformed the fiscal framework and more broadly set the public finances on a sustainable footing. At the autumn budget, that included doubling the buffer against our fiscal rules, providing more certainty and stability for taxpayers and for businesses. This is a core part of a wider economic strategy, including budget measures to reduce inflation, pushing down on the cost of living. All this helps to push down on interest rates and give businesses the confidence to invest. This is the right plan, and things are moving in the right direction. Just last week, we learnt that January saw a £30.4 billion public finance surplus, the highest monthly surplus on record. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is all supported by our reforms to the fiscal framework. We have reset the fiscal rules to reprioritise public investment and introduced a fiscal lock to ensure governments cannot sideline the Office for Budget Responsibility, as we sadly saw under the last Parliament. We are also committed to delivering one fiscal event a year, delivering on our manifesto and bringing the UK into line with the vast majority of advanced economies. At the budget, the Chancellor announced plans to strengthen that commitment. We are doing so by drawing on recommendations from the IMF in their Article 4 report last summer. The IMF made the case that fiscal policy stability would be aided by ensuring that the fiscal rules would only be assessed once a year. We agree. So this government is legislating to ensure this is the case. To deliver this change, we are updating the two core parts of the fiscal framework. First, updating the primary legislation, the Budget Responsibility and National Audit Act 2011 via the Finance Bill. Clause 251 of the Finance Bill provides for one fiscal rules assessment per financial year. We are also updating the secondary legislation, the Charter for Budget Responsibility. This is the subject of today's debate. The updated Charter reinforces the Finance Bill change. It makes no changes to the fiscal rules, but ensures that those rules should only be assessed once per financial year, specifically removing the requirement in Chapter 4 of the Charter for the OBR to conduct a fiscal rules assessment alongside any forecast. This ensures we can reduce the number of fiscal rules assessments a year without any reduction in fiscal transparency. This government is absolutely committed to the OBR's independence and its vital role in providing regular assessments of the economy and the public finances. The OBR will continue to publish a second 5-year forecast in the spring. This will aid transparency and inform the Debt Management Office's financing remit. But the government will not normally respond with fiscal policy. I look forward to seeing a few more honourable members of this House for the next of these forecasts, the spring forecast, a week today. Madam Deputy Speaker, I recommend the House approves the updated Charter and I commend the motion to this House.
The question is as on the order paper. Shadow Secretary of State.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I thank the Minister for a succinct opening speech. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Charter for Budget Responsibility seeks to confer the important attributes of stability and credibility to a government's management of public finances and the wider economy. Stability and credibility are not exactly the first two words that spring to mind to describe the current government's management of the economy. Through its own incompetence, it has presided over a chaotic year that has shredded any remaining confidence in the Chancellor and her team, and more importantly, has done lasting damage to the life chances of so many young people who now cannot find work. And as the Chancellor prepares her spring statement, we have a Prime Minister living on borrowed time. This government is painfully lacking in real-world economic experience, and it desperately needs help. So we will not be opposing the measures this evening. Very happy to.
Does the Shadow Minister share the concerns that many, indeed probably all MPs from Northern Ireland have, and that's in relation to how this budget is? By the way, first of all, I should have welcomed the good news that there has been in relation to the tax surplus to that's good news. I mean, look, who wouldn't be churlish not to welcome that, because it's for the benefit of us all. But just to say this, and when it comes to Northern Ireland and to the Northern Ireland Executive, the Northern Ireland Executive are finding it incredibly difficult to make ends meet, to make the budget balance, to make the books balance. And one of those things that we look back on is the Barnett Consequential. And it's been promised for many times over a number of years that the Barnett Consequential would be addressed. Now, that hasn't happened. But every time the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee have said it, individual MPs have said it, governments, Conservative government and this government have said they would look at it, but nothing has happened. Does the Shadow Minister believe it's now time to get things right for Northern Ireland, the budget, to help us to govern and deliver the goods as the government is doing here? Thank you.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I think his issue about Barnett Consequential is one directly for the Minister to reply, but the Conservative and Unionist Party, as you know, has a very strong, support and kinship with our citizens in Northern Ireland. As to his comment about the revenues that the government received in January of this year, I would just point out to my honourable friend that in large part was due to self-assessment returns in the year and capital gains returns that we filed in that year. And in fact, I think when we tease through the data, we will see that a lot of that came from people making what in the long run were not economic decisions in their own interest, caused and made because of the uncertainty that was brought into the economy through the Chancellor herself, confusing the people for an entire year. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, to illustrate the chaos in the last year, let me remind the House what the then Chief Secretary said in this equivalent debate on the Charter last year. The then Chief Secretary said, quote, "Growth is the primary mission of this government." But since then, and comparing the OBR forecast from 2024 and 2025, growth is down in each year of the forecast period. In 2026, it's down to 1.3% from 1.8%. It's down in 2027. It's down in 2028. And it's down in 2029. The Chief Secretary that last year said, quote, "The Chancellor's autumn 2024 budget put the public finances back on track, and we will keep them there." But no, since that statement, the Chancellor has brought forward proposals to cut £5 billion from welfare. Then she reversed them. She said that she would stick to the two-child benefit cap. Then she caved in to Labour backbenchers. The Chancellor has been forced to U-turn on her removal of winter fuel payments to pensioners. She's U-turned on her plans to tax our pubs out of existence. And she has U-turned on her damaging plans on the family farm tax and the family business tax. And after having said that she would not be coming back for more taxes, she did indeed come back to whack the British people again with tax increases amounting to over £26 billion. And when this government came to office, the forecast was that the government would need to borrow £77 billion this fiscal year. But under this Chancellor, that level of borrowing has ballooned to £120 billion so far and is forecast to reach £138 billion by the end of the year. According to November 2025 OBR, public sector net debt will continue to rise over the forecast period despite Labour raising taxes to record levels, debt rising from 93.6% of GDP to 97% by the time of the next general election in 2028-29, if this government lasts that long. Given the wreckage it has caused in the general economy, Labour's spin doctors have started to claim the government has the fastest deficit reduction plan in the G7, but that is only because this government has spent so recklessly in its first years. And achieving this remarkable reduction rests on the credibility of the government's plans to raise taxes ahead of a general election and on their ability to rein in public spending in the out years. Plans, surely, which their skittish backbenchers will stymie if that government lasts that long. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are two changes I would like to note in this revised Charter. The first is the decision to change the definition of the current budget being quote-unquote in balance. The previous Charter in clause 3.6 said, ... where balance is defined as a range in surplus or in deficit of no more than 0.5% GDP. The current Charter does not include this condition. I'd like to ask the Minister, why has the decision been made to remove that flexibility? And also, I'd be interested in what he thinks of the Institute of Fiscal Studies' recent report, which stated, quote, "The UK's fiscal framework is based around a set of pass-fail numerical fiscal rules. The fiscal debate is overly fixated on the amount of headroom the government has against the most binding of these rules. The system incentivises the government to operate with the smallest amount of headroom possible, with policy often fine-tuned according to the central point of a highly uncertain forecast from the OBR. The IFS report recommended that the UK would be better served by a new framework based around a set of fiscal traffic lights. The government appears to have gone in the opposite direction to these recommendations by stressing the importance of pinpoint accuracy, and I'd just be interested in the Minister's views on that. Now, to the most significant change, Madam Deputy Speaker, the removal of what in the previous Charter was Clause 4.27. The removed clause said, quote, "At the same time as the forecast, the OBR will produce its assessment of the extent to which fiscal policy has delivered or is likely to deliver the fiscal mandate," unquote. So the government has, at a stroke, removed the opportunity for an independent assessment by the OBR ahead of the government's spring statement. Yet last year, many of the OBR significantly revised many of its previous assessments ahead of the spring statement. Then the OBR wrote that they were expecting GDP growth of 1%, half the rate of October forecast, and CPI inflation to rise from 2.5% to 3.2%, 0.6% higher than forecast in October. I've been called kiddo for a while. It's exactly right. Exactly right. So it is important. This is an important point. I hope my friend, the whip, understands on our side. Understands this is an important point to make. It may have taken me time to get there, Madam Deputy Speaker, but this is the important point. So the issue here is why make this change now? The Budget Responsibility and National Audit Act 2011 is clear that the OBR must prepare fiscal and economic forecasts and assessments at least twice a year. Clause 251 of the Finance No. 2 Bill, while retaining the requirement for the OBR to prepare forecasts twice a year, seeks to remove the requirement in the 2011 Act for the OBR to provide their assessment twice a year. So perhaps the Chief Secretary can confirm that the reason we are debating... So perhaps the Minister, the wannabe Chancellor, so perhaps the Minister can confirm that the reason we are debating today a revised Charter that now excludes an OBR forecast just ahead of the spring statement is specifically to preclude the OBR doing its own assessment on the imminent spring statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're supporting the measure tonight, but not with any confidence in this government's handling of the economy. In lacking that confidence, we are not alone. According to the latest ICAEW survey of business confidence fell again in the last quarter of 2025 with record concerns about the tax burden on business. In its December 2025 survey, YouGov found that 80% of the British people thought the government was handling the economy badly. It is a sorry, sorry state for our great country.
Spokesperson Charlie Maynard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I will not burden the House with too long a speech. There are a lot of issues with the government's and the country's economic policy-making process, but I think there is some good argument for reducing the number of fiscal events which create artificial cliff edges. But I also note the concerns, including from the IFS, that it looks more like a way to reduce scrutiny of the government's economic record. Fundamentally, if we are serious about the responsible management of the public finances, about tackling our high levels of debt, and about getting our economy growing again, then I am most interested in how we scrutinise our government's tax and spending plans. The current situation, where we have months and months of speculation and then approve hundreds of billions of pounds worth of government tax and spending with just a few hours of debate, with no one permitted to see what the Chancellor is proposing in the budget until it is being announced as a fait accompli in Parliament, is exceptional by international standards and a key source of uncertainty and instability. If the government truly wants to improve market confidence, then this is where they should be looking to make reforms. We could look at Sweden, for example, where following a budget crisis in the early 90s and soaring debt, they introduced proper parliamentary debate of the government's budget, where alternatives and amendments are made before it is finalised. It then gets a subsequent period of scrutiny and accountability. The fact that Sweden has seen years of strong growth, high living standards, and that its debt has now dropped from 80% of GDP to 30% is a positive endorsement of this approach. The reality is that incredibly important choices are made as a part of the budget process. These choices impact the day-to-day life of each of our constituents, whether in Witney or any of our constituents that you all represent, the members all represent. The people have a right to have the fullest possible picture as to how the government are going about setting their taxes, spending their money, and managing the economic picture, and this step will not achieve that alone. The government needs to foster stability and manage the public finances responsibly. That hinges on getting growth back into our economy and not penciling in unfair tax rises in a last-minute fashion at the end of the forecast period just to stick to the letter of the fiscal rules. However, until the government grasps that nettle on much more fundamental reform of our budget process, I don't think this will be achieved, and more critically, I don't think the dial will move on either economic growth or market confidence.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the two frontbench spokespeople, one of whom spoke admirably quickly. Just briefly on the Lib Dem spokesmen, I won't repeat the case for these changes, given I think we've heard from both opposition parties that they're happy to support the government's changes to the Charter today. So just directly on the questions raised, from the Lib Dem spokesperson, it's always good to hear anybody praising Sweden in any given debate. But on the questions of scrutiny, I don't think he gives enough credit to his colleagues on the finance bill who have spent many hours scrutinising the policies, and I'm sure they'd be upset to hear his lack of faith in them. Today, directly on his question about transparency, I think that is important, and that's why we're maintaining the 2 forecasts a year, despite the 1 fiscal event. Turning to the opposition spokesperson, he asks why make these changes now. The answer is that in our manifesto we committed to 1 fiscal event a year, and the IMF have come forward with sensible recommendations to reinforce that, and we are just responding to the IMF's recommendations. He asked about the question about the range that was contained in the previous charter. That is being removed because that only applied at the spring forecast, and we're no longer carrying out a fiscal assessment at the spring forecasts. He asks about the IFS's report on suggesting a dashboard rather than the fiscal rules. I can tell him there will be no change to the fiscal rules, although I obviously always enjoy reading any think tank's reports, and I'd point out that we've already doubled the headroom against the fiscal rules. But more importantly, I was just sad to hear the opposition spokesperson's remarks more generally, because I always enjoy normally his perkiness, at least outside of this chamber, but he has turned into a gloomster. He has a total gloomster. He's totally ignored the record monthly surplus for the public finances. He's ignored the fact that wages are up, business investment is up, the GDP has grown the fastest of any European G7 economy. He's ignored the fact that GDP per capita has grown in 2025 after flatlining in the last year of the Tory government and falling in the Parliament before that. He's ignored inflation falling, interest rates falling. So I think it is right for the gloomster to be gloomy about his party's prospects, but not to be gloomy about the UK economy. And on that basis, I commend this motion to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.